Friends, welcome. A special episode yet again. Today I am in the south of France, right at the ocean. Maybe you can hear the waves in the background. I will keep them in because I just love it. I often ask my guests what grounds you. That's the direct question, and they have very many different answers. Kurt said mathematics, and I really like that one. But for me, it's the sound of the waves more than anything. Sound of nature. So, I'm going to discuss my thesis today. I don't have internet here. I'm not able to converse with people over Zoom. And yeah, I just got back the result for my thesis. I'm happy. I passed everything. And I did it in Dutch, so I'm not really able to share it with a lot of you guys or with a lot of other people in my life, because a lot of people in my life don't speak Dutch. But I figured I could do an episode about it, keep you up to speed, tell you a bit about it. It won't be a word for word read through. I think that's a bit too boring, but I will see whatever way I do it. I hope it catches on and you guys enjoy it. And if the topic intrigues you more, just get into contact with me and I can give you more resources. So yeah, that's the idea for today. Why am I wearing an orange tank top? Well, the Dutch are playing European Championships football. I love playing football. It's a part of my play routine, and I love watching it too. So hopefully by the time this comes out, we're in the semifinals. But yeah, that's I think I explained everything. Yeah, I'm on my honeymoon. I'm married. I showed it in the last video, but I have this wedding ring. Super happy. These last 2 weeks now have been bliss. really fun, really relaxing. Time to integrate, and yeah, that's it, guys. Enjoy this episode, and if this doesn't interest you, just skip on to the next one. So before we get started, I just want to show you the ocean. I'm going to turn my camera over here. Yeah, that's it. Today is a bit of a rainy day. Like, I've seen better ones here. Pretty much the whole time it's been perfect weather. But man, this is just the best. I wrote part of the thesis here. Took some time off with my little brother, and that was awesome. But yeah, let's get into the teeth of it. I'm actually going to pull up the thesis on my screen for those watching on video. Feel invited to watch along. You don't have to if you're listening on audio. It's really just a bonus. And how do I do that again? OBS. Okay, I'm going to tiny myself down. And my screen is here. So I think I should be seeing everything now. Yeah. So the title of the thesis is The Theology of the Hymns to Amun from Papyrus Leiden I 350. And then my research question is, what is the view of Egyptian polytheism according to Papyrus Leiden I 350? So this is the papyrus. You see a picture of it for those listening on audio. It's a old document. I would say it's about, let me count. It's from the time of Ramses II. So I think maybe 4,000 years old, something in that ballpark. It's written in hieratic, not in hieroglyphic script. Hieroglyphs are the very well-defined icons, let's say. There's a better word for that. Pictograms, I'm not sure. This is more of a cursive script. It almost looks like Arabic or Chinese. I'm zooming in right now. And I had to learn hieratic to read it just last year in the winter and autumn, and it was absolute hell. Probably the hardest class I've ever done in my life. You can see like a lot of the signs, and for those just listening, that's okay, are just vertical stripes, and you have to start to discern the vertical stripes. So you have to determine which one is which because of the context. But yeah, just an absolute hell of a class for me, at least. So I start with an introduction, and there's a quote that I start with. Three are all the gods, Amun, Re, and Ptah, whose equal does not exist, who hides his name as Amun. He is Ra in his face, his body is Ptah. A little bit of background as well. So this is my thesis in undergraduate studies in Egyptology, just for people that don't know. I guess you do now. This is a very intriguing passage. I really still don't understand it at all. but it refers to the gods as three, as all the gods as three. And that will be a recurring theme in this papyrus. In the introduction, I basically explained that this papyrus is extremely enigmatic and intriguing because of the theology that is expressed within it. And very clearly, an idea that's expressed in the papyrus is that all the gods come forth out of one god, and that is Amun, or Amun-Ra, as he's also sometimes named by. And so this is a view that comes close to monotheism, but isn't monotheism exactly. It is what a lot of people have described as henotheism, but there's academic debate about it still. Henotheism is basically the idea that you admit the existence of other gods, but that you view one god as being higher than those gods. And this is something I've spoken about before with Kurt, for example, and also recently with David Falk, who had a lot to say about it. But yeah, so that's the introduction. I got to this thesis topic basically just going to my supervisor and being like, these are my interests. I spoke to him about my theological, philosophical interests, René Girard, a bunch of things, and he was like, this is actually perfect for you, so I'm very grateful for that. I start my first chapter, I wrote about Egyptian theology. That's basically the first chapter, what it's about. I'm trying to explain a bit how the Egyptians thought in terms of theology and what polytheism is exactly. And I'll just read through it a bit and I'll comment where necessary. Theology is a word that I'll quickly brings with it Western and Christian associations. But I'm still using this word because I believe that the term, despite the associations, is very fitting for the nature of the papyrus. And then I go and look at the etymology of the word theology, which comes from theos, which means God, and logos, which a lot of you will know is extremely difficult to translate, but I thought it was a very useful term to use, even though a lot of people find it difficult to use because of all the associations. And then I say it's difficult to understand Egyptian theology because it's within polytheism, and we are, as a society, monotheistic. At least a lot of our cultural heritage is Christian, it's Jewish, or for some Muslim from the Western world, and of course then you have all sorts of other systems in other parts of the world. But I found the way the Egyptians describe their religion super interesting. Like, they can have different stories about how the world was created, and they don't oppose each other. That's something that really intrigued me from the start of doing Egyptology. And one of the greats in Egyptology, Jan Asman, he explained that the Egyptians didn't understand religion from a correct or incorrect paradigm. They rather spoke more about sacred and less sacred. And that basically means that they don't have a lot of propositional clashes, and the propositional in general wasn't very important in Egypt. So like I said, there could be different stories about creation that were completely able to exist next to each other. And then I mentioned that in our paradigm, which is in many ways scientific, we approach stories and we approach religion as scientific theories to be falsified. And that has caused us to almost equate religion with beliefs, that if you believe that these theories, which they're not, are true, then you are religious. But I tried to explain that religion for the Egyptians was something completely different. It was the way that they understood their reality. There were no atheists in Egypt, you know. And then I quote I refer to another Egyptologist that describes the gods as phenomenological realities. So they were simply part of the lived experience of reality, according to this Egyptologist. This is the quote: "Since the gods were phenomenological realities that belonged to the physics of the universe, and in this regard were immanent in it, it was absurd to believe or not believe in their existence." I'm quickly going to tiny myself down so you can see proper. Okay, let me move on to see that I'm still being relevant with what I'm saying. I end this first little chapter with saying that, just like with theology, it's very important to get rid of our preconceived notions of a lot of our understandings about religion, for example. We need to let the sources speak for themselves, so it's really important to take a step back, so to speak. And then I quote another Egyptologist, Erik Hornung, German guy. If it is to count as Egyptology, the nature, sphere of action, and meaning of Egyptian gods must first be studied, and one must ask above all how Egyptians themselves saw and understood their gods before even considering any question of evaluation. So I'm really trying to avoid this evaluation, this judgment of whatever I'm reading, and I'm trying to let go of my lens, which I'm not able to do completely, but that's something important. Then I have a subchapter about time and history. I write that the Egyptian polytheism doesn't have a clear starting date. The script in general started around 3200 BC in Egypt, and around the same time in Mesopotamia as well. And we don't have written sources for Egyptian religion before that time, but the thing is, many stories, Egyptian myths, they could have gone back in time much further. We just don't have the sources for it. That doesn't mean that the Egyptian religion doesn't go back even further. And then I show a picture of a Narmer palette, which is a what you call that, a stele? It's a palette, I guess, and on which you can see some of the first religious imagery from Egypt. I'm going to zoom in on it for those watching at home, and I'm going to remove my face to the right so you can see it proper. Yeah, so there's no real hieroglyphics on this yet, but you can see certain animals being depicted, and people make the link to some Egyptian gods. So this is some of the first sources, and I thought that was nice to show. Then I say that history is not a very important part of Egyptian religion. It's much more so in Christianity or Islam. Christianity is in many ways a historic religion, but because of the coming of Jesus, and the same holds true for Muhammad in Islam. Egypt doesn't find history very important, ancient Egypt, and you see that they're also not really bothering so much with historical accuracy as we are right now. Time was much more cyclical in Egypt, in the seasons, in the journey of the sun god every day, in the yearly inundation of the Nile. The Egyptians really thought that they were also partly responsible of making time cyclical, to make sure that the world could regenerate itself. Basically what the Egyptians were doing is they were supporting the gods, and with this they believed that they would avoid creation from falling into chaos. In that sense, there's no linear time progression in the modern way of thinking. And then I end that with saying that partially because of that, in Egypt people could speak of a religion with a time span of at least 3,500 years, which still like completely baffles my mind. I don't even understand it. Then I mentioned two Egyptian concepts which are pretty cool, Jet and Nehech. These are two different words that can both mean eternity and time, and there are two different ways for the Egyptians to understand time. But I'm not an expert on this, so I won't waste more uneducated words on it. The importance of different concepts of time is also something you can see back in Egyptian king lists. So a lot of people have spoken about that, among which Graham Hancock, about how the Egyptian chronology of kings goes back super far, where you have the normal kings, and then even before that you have these sort of like mythical king lists. Some people think they're mythical, some people attribute other meanings toward that, where you have all these gods who are in there as well with longer lifespans. And this of course can remind you of the Bible, where you have similarly this sort of chronology where old biblical figures are named and how old they were. Okay, continuing into Egyptian polytheism, chapter 1.2. You can't really speak of monotheism in Egypt, with of course the exception of the Amarna revolution, of which I will speak more in the future. In Egyptian thought, the gods are reality. They are living forces with influence on the world. They lived on earth but they retreated to the heaven and to the underworld, and only during feasts and festivals of those gods they returned temporarily. By that process, heaven and earth start to become connected again. That's something that I wrote about, and I referenced Jan Asman for this. They manifest themselves then in processions, and the Egyptians can ask them help with the help of oracles. I did a presentation about oracles as well last year. Extremely interesting topic. And one thing that I was noticing about the Egyptian oracles when I researched this is that, contrary to, for example, the Oracle of Delphi, which John Vervaeke has spoken about, the Egyptian oracles are very precise in their answers. So with the Oracle of Delphi, you can ask the oracle a question, and they will answer super vaguely, which also enhances the intrigue and the mystery. Whereas in the Egyptian oracles, it's a yes or no often. And how does an oracle work exactly? One way in which it works is you would have a procession, so you would have priests holding a statue of one of the gods, and then you can ask it a question, and then the priest would move with the statue to one direction or the other to give the answer. And a lot of people think that that's nothing real is happening there, but even my own teachers are less certain of that those priests weren't actually faking that, like that they felt like they were possessed by some sort of force to all move into one direction. And so something to ponder for sure. One important difference between polytheism of Egypt and other examples of polytheism is that the Egyptians didn't emphasize predicting the will of the gods, predicting the future. For the Egyptians, it was much more important to assist the gods, as I mentioned before. Whereas in Mesopotamia, for example, that's like divination and predicting the future plays a much bigger role in reading the skies. Then I speak a bit about understanding the value of polytheism in its time, and how a lot of people these days often think of polytheism as something lesser than. But again, I want to emphasize that we need to let go of our preconceived notions to really understand the Egyptians well. And then I say in favor of polytheism, which I'm not a polytheist, if we analyze polytheism in Egypt from the sources, from ancient Egypt, then we can see the plurality, the translatability, and the personal characteristics of the god is a serious development. One of the qualities of the Egyptian religion is, for example, that the Greeks could translate their gods to the Egyptians' god. They could see their own gods in the Egyptians' gods, like Dionysus would be understood as Osiris, even though they don't share that many characteristics. It was a way for other cultures to come into Egypt, being like, oh yeah, there's Zeus, in Amun, for example. Then I write a bit about syncretism. This is a concept in religion. It's not exactly combining gods. A German word is really useful for this. It's called einwohnen. It's like living in, where one god can live in another god. And this also happens with the god that I'm discussing in this papyrus, Amun-Ra, or Amun. Sometimes he gets called Amun-Ra, and in that sense, Amun lives kind of inside of Ra. You can understand it like that. And so this is just a concept that is relevant to understand for if you want to dive deeper into gods as a phenomenon. Also, the Greeks did this. They syncretized different gods. They could syncretize Egyptian gods with Greek gods. And Vervaeke spoke about this when I spoke to him as well. So that this is a sort of it's a way in which you can refine your spiritual home by bringing in your own gods into a new land. When your religion is in chaos, when you don't have a religion that you can hold on to, you try to get elements of the familiar into the unfamiliar. And there were times in Egyptian history where there was a lot of Greeks around, and the Greeks were in the Egyptian cities like Alexandria. And then how do you make meaning? And so I'm not explaining away this phenomenon. I'm trying to understand it and trying to explain it to give you understanding. You could say that there is a underlying religious unity between different polytheistic religions, and this is exactly the force that was lacking in ethnocentric religions of the past. So in that sense, polytheism is really a development, and it's a way to foster more understanding and peace between different cultures. Jan Asman writes, "The great achievement of polytheism is the articulation of a common semantic universe. It is this semantic dimension that makes the names translatable, that is, makes it possible for gods from different cultures or different regions and traditions within a culture to be equated with one another." So yeah, that's chapter 1.2, polytheism, Egyptian polytheism, and then we're moving on to the Amarna revolution, and I think a lot of people could be interested in this. It was one of my favorite parts to write about in the thesis. It refers to a very specific period in Egyptian history in which one god seemed to really rule, and the pharaoh at the time denied existence of other gods. So it's a little bit of a prelude. I'll start off with a bit of a hymn to that monotheistic seemingly god from that period. "How many are your deeds, though hidden from sight? Sole God, beside whom there is none. You made the earth as you wished, you alone. All peoples, herds and flocks, all upon earth that walk on legs, all on high that fly on wings, the lands of Kor and Cush, the land of Egypt." So this is the great hymn to the Aten, translated by Miriam Lichtheim, published in 1976. It's a hymn that says a lot about the theology of the Amarna period, and especially the line "Sole God, beside whom there is none," seems to outline this exclusivity of the Aten, who is this god that is being referred to. So let me speak a bit about the historical context of this period. During the 18th dynasty, around 1352 before Christ, I was wrong in the intro. I think the papyrus is like 3,200 years old, just to correct myself. Around 1352 before Christ, the pharaoh at the time, Amenhotep IV, landed on the Egyptian throne. At this point, the praise or the worship of the Aten, who's a sun disk, who was a manifestation of Ra, the sun god, started already early in the 18th dynasty. So this was already going on for decades, if not longer. In that sense, the Amarna revolution wasn't as sudden as it may seem. This was a continuation of a longer development towards the worship of the sun god. It was under the rule of Amenhotep IV, later named Akhenaten, that this worship entered into its apex. Basically the crux of it, the highest of that. Sorry, I'm translating everything from Dutch as we speak, so please bear with me. Akhenaten saw Aten not only as the highest god, but as the only god, by denying the existence of other gods. And he started a city, Amarna, at the time was called Akhet-Aten, which means, let me think, Ak is like soul, et Aten, Akhet-Aten. It's basically like the accomplished soul of the Aten, that's what he called that city. And we now call it Amarna. With it, he didn't only break from tradition in the theological sense, but he also took that physical step to a new city. And Amarna is really interesting. I asked David Falk about this as well in the recent talk. Amarna was basically located in a terrible location in Egypt for agriculture, really hard to sustain, and it only lasted for about 16 years from what I remember. And the thing is about Amarna is we know so much about it because it was abandoned. So because it was such a short time span and it was just left in the desert there, other cities didn't get built on top of that. So we have a lot of evidence from just that blip in history, just like 16 years again of this Amarna revolution. And it was really done a lot in shaping our ideas about Egyptian religion, even though it's a completely, it's basically the exception. It's not representative of Egypt, but we have so much evidence from it, and that makes us, I think, prone to misunderstand Egyptian religion in many ways. But yeah, so that's a good caveat. During his rule, Akhenaten banned all other gods, and he started a campaign to delete basically a lot of images and inscriptions of Amun specifically. And so Amun is the god of the papyrus that I'm discussing in this thesis. And he ends up, after Akhenaten's death, to actually become the highest god. So he had good reason to delete all these images, and I've I've read a lot of stones myself in museums, in the museum that I have classes at close to, where you actually see it being carved out, and he used the whole army to achieve this feat. Akhenaten died 17 years after ascending to the throne. Then there were some people following up on ascending the throne. Maybe his wife did as well, but maybe it was a hidden identity. Anyway, who eventually follows is someone that's very well known in history, and again, it's because Amarna is so well kept, and it is Tutankhamun, who was first named Tutankhaten because he was still part of this Aten religion when he was just a very young boy. But then he had other influences. His father dies at this point, and people step back from this Aten religion. They go back to the old Egypt as it was, with all the different gods. And you even see a swing back, which is interesting, I find, is that all this exclusivity, it exploded at some point, and now all the different gods start to reappear, and they appear more in a higher volume in graves, for example, in private tombs. Papyrus Leiden I through 50, the papyrus that we're discussing, is only written one dynasty and no longer than a century later. The Amarna period will then undoubtedly have influence, or very likely have influence, on papyrus. Maybe because of the repression of the period in the Egyptian history has Amarna left a big mark on the theology of the Egyptians. The Egyptians really tried to basically delete the Amarna period from history. Like, there's no record of Akhenaten, only because Egyptologists have dug it up, archaeologists have dug it up, and they found it. But the Egyptians themselves seem to not remember this part historically, but in their cognition and in their religious memory, this was a trauma for them. It was really something that went along with a lot of violence as well. You could not do anything but worship the Aten, and you would be punished if not for not doing so. And like I said, all these images were being deleted, so it was a very violent part and a very traumatic part of Egyptian religious history. And then I remind my readers, which are two people, that the Amarna period left a gigantic stamp on Egyptology, mark on Egyptology, but people often forget that it's such a short period, around 20 years. That's 20 years of a 3,500 year Egyptian history. To put that in perspective, Amarna represents only about 0.57% in terms of time of the Egyptian religious story. And so that's a good caveat, I think, to keep in mind. Then Freud had a funny idea at some point that I mentioned because I thought it was interesting. He thought that Moses was a follower of Akhenaten, and that he wanted to save that new sun religion by organizing the exodus to Egypt. I don't think this theory holds a lot of water, but I just thought it was funny that Freud was thinking about this. So yeah, after Amarna, that's what I just spoke about before. Got a bit ahead of myself. You have this explosion back to many of the gods. And one phenomenon that Jan Assmann, the Egyptologist, observed was that explicit theology started to burst out into Egypt, where the religious ideas before were more living in the subconscious of the Egyptians, in the rituals and the mythology and in the daily life. Theology now came more and more from the intellect. So people started to write down their religious ideas on papyri, and my papyrus that I'm discussing here is exactly that. It's a form of explicit theology and trying to really write down the doctrine. And yeah, it reminds me a bit also about the right-left hemisphere dichotomy that McGilchrist speaks about, where you really see a split at this point from the Amarna Revolution onward, from a more right hemispheric understanding to a more left hemispheric, from mythos to logos, so to speak. Then another thing that started developing after the Amarna period was personal piety in Egypt. This term refers to the personal relationship between man and God, where there was often a specific connection between a person and a specific Egyptian god. There's a lot more evidence of this happening at that time, and before that was just less the case. One of the first papers I wrote in my undergraduate studies was about one conception of the soul in Egypt, the Ba. And with that you also saw a big development throughout the ages, throughout the different periods in Egypt, where in the first, in the Old Kingdom, only the kings and the queens were thought to have had this type of soul. And then in the Middle Kingdom, you start to see a lot more people, like regents, for lack of a better word, mayors of cities. They also start to have the conception of a soul, and then more and more the democratization, as they call it, of the soul starts to happen. And the same happens in I think this phenomenon with personal piety, is that people get more and more of a personal relationship. People are starting to get an identity themselves, and the individual themselves starts to appear in text, and everyone starts to be understood as having a soul. Alright, now we're going on to Papyrus Leiden I 350 specifically. I give some propositional information about how it was bought by Leiden, by the museum. It's not very interesting to myself, but what is a funny aspect of this is that on the back of this papyrus, which is like a super sacred papyrus, probably used in temples, someone wrote down a travel log of some expedition. So in Egypt, just in the same period, about, someone used this same document to write down their travel log. And I read the travel log mostly, and based on what is written on the travel log, we have also done a bit of dating and a bit of finding the origin of where does this papyrus come from. And of course you can't equate the two exactly, but they must have come from a similar region. And so yeah, I thought that was quite kind of wild, and I wonder what that means for how important this papyrus was, because I cannot imagine doing that to another sacred text. Or perhaps this text was replicated many times and we've just lost that, and this was just one of many copies, but I'm just thinking off the top of my head here. Then I describe some more propositional information. Don't think it's very interesting. Alright, moving on. So I'm discussing the dissertation of Jan Zandé, who is an Egyptologist in the Netherlands. He's the person that really discussed this papyrus in full length. He translated all of it and he interpreted a lot of it. And he did that in 1947. And I've used this a lot. It's written in really old Dutch. It's quite kind of hard to read, and the translation of the papyrus is also written in Old Dutch, which to me was really fun. It's like poetic. It's like reading an Old English text. But it's funny how language changes so quickly, and in Egypt it doesn't. So, historical and religious context. We think that it comes from the time of Ramses II, who reigned for a very long time. If I'm seeing correctly, 67 years he was pharaoh. That's a record for sure. And a lot of people are named Ramses after him because they see him as sort of this pharaoh to aspire to, with such a long and successful reign in many ways. But there's a million caveats to what I just said. I'm just going to leave it for Aaron, if he was an Egyptologist. So yeah, 1279, between 1279 and 1213 before Christ. The influence from the Amarna period on the papyrus is very easily understood. Amun writes, in the aftermath of this revolutionary step, the Amarna revolution, the gods are readmitted into cults and a general worldview. The henotheistic perspective, however, and this already refers to this view that I started off with one god being stronger than others, still prevails, and the gods, especially in hymns to Amun, now tend to be demoted to names, manifestations, symbols, and limbs of the one. So while we go back to Egyptian polytheism as it was, seemingly, there seems to be a clear theological development that's stuck, and that's the perspective of henotheism. And it looks a lot like monotheism, but again, it differs in that within henotheism other gods still exist. They're just lesser than, they're manifestations of. So going to the hymns, going to speak a bit about hymns in Egypt. Hymns have been a part of Egypt since the Old Kingdom. The earliest hymns that we know of are found in the pyramid texts. These are written inside of the pyramids. From the Middle Kingdom, there's also longer hymns to be found on monuments, papyri, and in the New Kingdom, hymns are even in private graves, used for basically available for use in the afterlife. That was the idea. Hymns could protect you. Hymns were necessary basically for the deceased. And according to an Egyptologist, Christian Sevikosh, hymns were supposed to be sung during festivals where they would have valuable information about the creative activities of the god who's being spoken about. According to her, this was specifically the case for the papyrus we're talking about today. Next to that, the temple is a very good location for use of hymns, and my supervisor thinks there must have been an Amun temple in Memphis, where the papyrus is presumably from, but we did not find that back, but I'm sure that is very likely to be the case, especially if you make such a long papyrus. One interesting aspect of hymns in ancient Egypt is the complete avoidance of referring to yourself. The individual that speaks out the hymns is not being mentioned. Jan Assmann understands this as basically a schending. Let me think about how to translate this word. It's not good to refer to yourself in the hymns, because the hymns are about worshiping the God. They're not about the people who use the hymns. Okay, continuing, based on Papyrus Leiden I 350 alone, we can already say that hymns also had a function to basically pass on theological knowledge, and to again express this explicit theology, express ideas that they wanted to make explicit, they wanted to be remembered. Continuing on about the contents of Papyrus Leiden I 350, I didn't translate it in the thesis in full. I simply didn't have the words. It's only 10,000 words, sadly, but I made basically a summary of it, and that I put in the appendix. I'm thinking of making an English translation of the whole papyrus. I think that would be useful for a lot of people, because I know that there's interest in it. People have come to me personally, and I think I could do it. But yeah, I start to discuss the papyrus itself now. I'm going to give some citations, and then I'm going to discuss a bit of the interpretation. Amun is Ma'at, and Ra brings peace. And here what we're seeing is that Amun and Ra are being named separately, and Ma'at is a whole nother concept on itself. Ma'at means cosmic balance, cosmic order. Everyone is supposed to execute Ma'at in their own lives. The king is supposed to execute Ma'at. Ma'at is basically a goddess, but she represents this cosmic balance, this turning chaos into order, to use Petersonian language. But yeah, that's worth a whole nother podcast, to be honest. But yeah, even though these gods are named separately, in a later passage there does seem to be a reference to one god specifically, because he is the only one, the godly, who hides his name, and that's a reference to Amun, whose name literally means to hide, but more on that later. Another passage. This is about the origin of life. Who created himself without anyone being there, who knew his manifestation, basically. And then I write, it is essential that the primal God was the cause of his own existence, of his own being, and after that the world, because otherwise he simply would have just been a consequence, just like the other gods, of an even higher cause. In that sense, they're not speaking about a cosmic God who's only operating within the universe. The primal God is the ground of being itself. He's the reason the world can exist. And then chapter 100 plays further with this self-creation. Who started to exist in the beginning. Amun, who started to exist in the beginning, different way of phrasing it, sorry, not same translation, without anyone being there, who knew his secret manifestation, without a God in front of him, without another God existing together with him, so that he could speak out his being, without his mother existing, who made his name, without his father being there, who created him, saying, I am the one who created his own egg. Yeah, it's a fun text for sure. And then what I'm making a little point here, creation stories or descriptions like this one illustrate a earlier made point. Multiple stories can be true, speaking about the beginning of time. This is possible because creating his egg clearly refers to a higher reality than just a material egg. Same holds true for another story where the primal God makes himself pregnant. Though this point may be absolutely obvious, especially to you guys listening, for the modern man, modern human, it's often hard to understand given the scientific paradigm, where we look at things as true or false. We look at them as scientific equations. Stories, especially creation myths, are not scientific propositions. Like, I felt that this was not really necessary to put down, but then still, a lot of people that I speak to about these things completely misunderstand stories, and they're not able to see the value of poetry or religion because of it. And then Jan Assmann, again, he's really what would I call him? The Carl Jung of Egyptology. Assmann writes that despite the many different origin stories of creation, there was a consensus in Egypt. The world has been made by one God. The different creation stories for a long time existed next to each other. But Assmann understands both the Amarna period as Papyrus Leiden, as well as Papyrus Leiden I through 50, as attempts to create a universally binding cosmology. He sees this papyrus as the solution to a theological problem, a solution that binds these different creation stories and tries to integrate them by understanding all of the gods as manifestations of one God. So this is a real theological development. Chapter 200, which is just the chapter after 100, it's a funny way of of basically organizing it, continues in a deep way about the hiddenness of Amun. The only Amun who hides himself for them, who hides himself for the gods. People don't know his being. He is further than the heavens. He's deeper than the underworld. All gods don't know his true being, his true manifestation. Clearly, a point is being made here again and again that's for a lot of people is difficult to understand. The God about whom is being spoken here is more than the universe. Where people often equate the words God and universe nowadays, the Egyptians, at least the Egyptians behind this papyrus, believed that their God had to be more than creation. That there had to be a source of all that is, that went beyond the world, beyond the universe. Theologically and philosophically, this was extremely advanced, I would say. And then in the next chapter, we enter into this passage that I started with. Three are all the gods, Amun, Re, and Ptah, whose equal does not exist, who hides his name as Amun, he is Ra in the face, his body is Ptah. So a lot has been said about this. I basically use a lot of my words for just analyzing this passage alone, so strap in. Theologian Manfred Gerg wrote an article about this, Trinity of Amun, Ra, and Ptah. And he thinks this is more than a triad. Triad is a different term. Triad is when you take three gods together. In Egypt, there's a lot of triads where you will have different combination of gods that can be worshipped in one group, let's say. So you have, for example, Horus, who's the son of Isis and Osiris. That can be understood as a triad. But Manfred Gork says this is not a triad. This is a trinity, a tri-unity. The three gods are really being put together. And I then historically named that Amun, Re, and Ptah often appear as gods that are being named with each other, especially under the reign of Ramses II. The three are represented explicitly many times. He had, for example, 4 divisions in his army during the Battle of Kadesh, and he named these after Amun, Re, Ptah, and then also Seth, which is worth another podcast to speak about. And then also in the grave of Tutankhamun, on one of the trumpets, you see the three gods represented with each other. But that's not necessarily a trinity or triunity. That's still just putting these three gods together. It's not implying that they're one. And then Jan Assmann sees the taking together of the three gods both as a triad and as a trinity. The triad he understands as plurality, to which the gods can be reduced, but he sees the trinity as a way in which the transcendental unity of the gods unfolds itself in the world. So I thought that was a really cool passage, and still a lot of people interpret it differently. I think Jan Assmann basically got it right, to be honest. But yeah, if you're interested, I can give you more sources about that. I think that's about it for like the papyrus, the most interesting bits, and now I'll continue on to speak a bit about Amun, his origin. Why Amun? Chapter 2.4. Given that Egyptian polytheism knew of many gods, people can wonder what is the reason to put Amun as the highest god. To figure this out, we need to look at the etymology of the word, so I've displayed it here, what it looks like. Iman. This word Iman has exactly the same spelling as the name Amun. The word Iman is often being translated as secret or hidden, or as a verb, to hide or to conceal. This hiddenness is a strength. Where, for example, the Aten, the sun disk that I spoke about, is clearly connected to the sun, Amun wasn't as easily pinned down to a specific explicit characteristic or a specific occurrence. Wow, this is an interesting word to translate. The more encompassing being of Amun made him perhaps more adept as a representation of the highest, the hidden ground of being of reality, the primal ground of being of reality. A different strength of the hidden nature of Amun, the secret nature of Amun, is that he didn't have a name. He had a name technically, but because the name meant hidden, it gave him a certain powers, because even the gods couldn't say his name. And then I quote a passage: immediately fall down by death because of fear is the fate of him who consciously or unconsciously speaks out his name. There is no able God who can call him on with that name. So that's a reference to, it's actually from the papyrus itself. And then Koch, he's a German theologist / Egyptologist, I think. He writes as well that the name Amun goes back to the hiddenness, the invisibility of it. He says the Egyptian is aware of this link and concludes that the human mind cannot fathom the greatness of the god. Then there is a caveat to all this that my supervisor caught me onto, and there's this French guy who wrote a book in 2018 about Amun Ra, and there's a whole chapter about the origin of Amun, and then he says that basically next to the secret translation or the hidden translation, there's other origins perhaps to Amun, among which it could be stable, it could be righteous, and I think the last one is that the verb can also be understood as to create. I must say these three alternative translations or origins do not have a lot of references to them. I think that what they do, however, show and emphasize is that Amun is not easy to pin down. So it's not easy to figure out what exactly is his origin, and that's why I think the hiddenness fits so perfectly in all of this. Now I'm going to finish up with my last chapter. This is Egyptian polytheism in relation to Papyrus Leiden I 350. In many ways, Papyrus Leiden is a big surprise in terms of its content. Amun or Amun Ra is being worshipped as one god, of which other gods are manifestation. But in reality, there were a lot of similar texts in Egypt. Not exactly the same, but similar, and I'll show you why. So, let's start with one of the references that I made. The honorable thought. I don't know how do you say it in English? Thought? Double big, I guess. I'm translating it from French. Lord of Shmun, big God, Lord of all the gods, Lord of the gods. So this is a hymn to Thoth, and written down in the tomb of Osiris, who was a priest of Thoth, and this is from the 4th century BC. And here Thoth is being described in a similar manner. And basically this is perspective and context. In this hymn, which is directed towards Thoth, he is understood as the great god, Lord of the gods, in the context of the hymn, but not necessarily in Egypt as a whole. To illustrate this point further, here's another example of a god that receives similar titles. This is the pyramid text of Mer en Re, so it's a really old text, say about 5,000 years old. O Geb, this is Osiris, nimmt him Zaf Merenre. Gather him to you, that what is against him might end. You alone are the great God, for Atum has given you his inheritance. He has given you the Ennead gathered, and Atum himself as well amongst them, gathered for his senior son's son in you. For he has seen you effective. You are hard, big, persuasive in your identity, of the persuasive mouth, the God's elite one. You are the Lord of the entire earth, in control of the Ennead and every God as well. As you exercise control, may you drive everything bad far away. Horus has followed you and desired you, and you are apparent as the dual king, in control of all the gods and their cause, or it's a type of soul as well. Problematic translation. Geb, who is the god, is being associated with the earth, is here described as the god who has the power over all the gods. Again, the context is very important. This form of seeming henotheism is temporary. It's not exclusive. It's only inside of the confines of the pyramid text, or with the other one in the tomb of Osiris. A god can be raised in the context of, for example, a hymn or a pyramid text, but this putting up, this raising up, can be reversed, and it's only applicable in certain circumstances. So here we can see what distinguishes Amun or Amun-Ra from these earlier mentioned examples. Amun started to be seen as the highest god, of which other gods were manifestations of, and not only in one papyrus, but in the Egyptian empire as a whole. His power got to such a point where in the 21st dynasty, Eric Hornung, a German Egyptologist, even used the word theocracy. The decisions of Amun, by use of oracles, were regulating a lot of administrative and political affairs. For example, Amun was responsible for choosing candidates for official functions and solving criminal cases. To illustrate his power even further, the name of the second pharaoh of the 21st dynasty, Amenemnesu, meant Amun is king. So in other sources, there's only a bit of play with the idea of one god above others, but in Papyrus Leiden I 350, this is being done extremely explicitly. And as I said before, this seems to have been a consequence of the Amarna period. So, on to my conclusion. This thesis has as a research question, what is the view of Egyptian polytheism according to Papyrus Leiden I 350? So, to answer this, we went through Egyptian polytheism, time in history. We spoke about the Amarna period. We spoke about the papyrus itself, Amun's origin. And with that, we come to our conclusion that the answer to the research question is that the view of Egyptian polytheism according to Papyrus Leiden I 350 is simply that Amun-Ra, or Amun, is the highest god. Other gods are mere manifestations of him. The gods do exist. In that sense, this view of theology differs from that one of Akhenaton, in that other gods are not denied their existence. Then, of course, there's the link to the Amarna period. It definitely influenced it. And lastly, the view differs from other Egyptian sources, in that Amun is clearly worshipped above other gods, and that actually happens in the empire as a whole. So yeah, that's basically the thesis, and I have my bibliography, and I have this whole appendix with a summary of the thesis. So I think I may have had also another citation that really clearly illustrates how Amun is really the highest god, and how they really explicitly say that. I'm going to try to find it if you give me just a second. But in the meantime, if you're interested in reading the whole thing, or if you just want to get a PDF and you want to translate it yourself, see if you can read it fully, feel free to shoot me a message. Here's another quote. They live daily because they see him. They are subjected to him, sealed by his seal. No god opens it except for his majesty. And then there's many more where he's being called the only one, the almighty one. And so yeah, that's basically it. I'm going to stop recording here, and I hope you guys enjoyed that. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments if you made it this far. And just to finish this off, I'm finishing my undergraduate studies, I basically finished it now. I'll graduate somewhere. I have my graduation ceremony, I know, October or something. But I'm not continuing, not doing a master's or PhD, at least not for now. I find Egyptology interesting, but to me it's not relevant enough. Maybe it's something I'll pursue later in life a bit more. For now, I just got married. I want to get to work as well. If I do study again, maybe I'm interested in psychology, as I mentioned before on this channel. But yeah, what excites me about Egypt is the mysteries, the unsolved puzzles, the things that we do not have a consensus on yet. And I'm afraid that if I continue down this path, I can see it already. I've seen it in this thesis. The incentives are not there to have original ideas, sadly. In undergraduate studies, sure, you can get away with a lot. You don't have the financial incentives to make people happy. But I'm afraid that in university systems, if you want to really flourish, the best thing you can do is to not create anything original or anything that goes against the currently held theories. People are very critical. I think in universities, in many ways, they're trying to make you critical, and that's a good thing in many ways. It's good to be critical. It's good to read a text, to read a theory, and to see the faults in it. But if that's the main thing you're doing, what are we doing? One of my most important principles is that I should create and not criticize. I think being a critic is much easier than creating something new. And yeah, I've just, over the last 3 years, I've seen that what makes my life so much easier is if I stop trying to have original ideas and I just recycle what is already known. And I find that sad. I would hope, especially the younger generations, would be encouraged to have more insights. And I think McGilchrist brilliantly explains, Ian McGilchrist, that to have insights you need to use the right hemisphere, and the right hemisphere is a bit of a devil's advocate. And being a devil's advocate does not reward in science, it does not reward in university, and for people looking to have a stable job, it's just not smart to do that. So yeah, I'm not going through with this. If I do get back into university, maybe it'll be for psychology, because I'd love to have a degree that basically gives me the credibility to help people on a professional level and on a personal level, and so that would be really cool, but I'm not sure. This is where I'm at now. All that said, I had a great time. If you ever have an interest and you have time and you have the money to just go into university and study something, I think studying Egyptology is really fun. It's really worth it if your livelihood doesn't depend on it, if you have a free spirit. I think really beyond university, it's not easy to get a lot of knowledge about Egypt, especially learning the languages. That is the biggest part of it. And so I do not regret what I've done here. I had a really good time, especially the last thesis was fun to write because it was about religious ideas, and I think in that it's so much less propositional that you can have a lot more liberty in what you're thinking about and what you're writing about. So that's been fun. But yeah, overall I think I'm gonna use my thinking faculty more in free time, more in my own ideas that I write down in my little journal that no one really ever reads, but that I think are very good for me. And I think that if I'd had to think that the way I write a thesis is in the same way, or write an essay, I think it would severely limit me, and it would impede me from having insights. So yeah, guys, there'll be another guest coming on Sunday, someone I'm excited to talk to. His name is Jake. I think you guys will like him too. And if you made it this far, again, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.